Have you ever stumbled upon a secret hidden in plain sight? Imagine living in a house only to discover that beneath the floorboards there's a room no one told you about. A room that has been sealed away for decades. When Emily Lowe found the bricked-off staircase leading to a buried chamber, she had no idea that opening the door would unleash something far more sinister than she could ever imagine. A mirror, a reflection, a twisted game of replacing her very soul. Is it possible to escape when the thing in the mirror wants your life? Emily Lowe had always been intrigued by the idea of restoring old homes. She bought the rundown estate with dreams of turning it into something beautiful, something that would honor its past while giving it a fresh start. But as the days went by, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was wrong with the house. It wasn't the creaky floors or the long-forgotten rooms. It was the subtle, unsettling presence of something lurking just beneath the surface. One day, while she was renovating, her dog, Max, began barking at an odd spot in the living room. At first, Emily thought it was just his usual behavior, but there was a persistent edge to his barking, something that made her skin crawl. When the floor finally collapsed, revealing a hidden staircase, she couldn't resist exploring further. What Emily found beneath her feet was far beyond anything she could have imagined. A hidden chamber, sealed away for decades, containing skeletal remains seated in a circle, each holding an antique mirror. The eeriness of the room wasn't just the macabre sight of the dead. It was the mirrors themselves. A strange pull led Emily to take one upstairs, and that's when everything changed. Her reflection in the mirror began to move independently, blinking, smiling, acting without her control. As days went on, Emily realized that the thing in the mirror wasn't just an image. It was a perfect version of herself, but sinister, bent on replacing her in the real world. What Emily didn't know was that the room she'd found was a prison for mirror doubles of the house's previous owners, each one trapped, waiting for someone new to take their place. Don't miss the chilling journey that takes Emily into the heart of horror itself. Subscribe now to hear the full story of the hidden room and learn what happens when mirrors don't just reflect your image, but steal your soul. Story number 1. The house was supposed to be their fresh start, a symbol of new beginnings. A place to raise their baby, a home to build memories, and a sanctuary from the noise of the world. But Lila Henderson didn't feel the warmth of safety that she thought would greet her as she stood in the middle of the old Victorian house, staring at the nursery. She wasn't sure if it was the peeling wallpaper or the strange feeling that lingered in the air, but something about it didn't sit right. Her husband, Marcus, was already busy in another room, unpacking boxes with the same enthusiasm that had led them to this decision. He was excited, but Lila felt a pull toward the nursery, a cold tug in her chest. It had been weeks since they'd moved in, but the odd occurrences had started only a few nights ago. At first, it was nothing more than a faint crackling sound from the baby monitor. Lila had chalked it up to interference, some odd glitch in the static, but when she listened closely, she could make out words. And then, it wasn't just words. It was a lullaby sung in a language she didn't recognize, soft and soothing like something from another time. The first few nights, she hadn't mentioned it to Marcus, unsure if she was imagining things or just overtired. But when it happened again, louder this time, she couldn't ignore it. "Marcus," she whispered one night as they both sat in bed, the soft hum of the monitor filling the room. "Listen to this." He rolled over, his brow furrowed with skepticism. "What now, Lila?" "There's something, a song, coming through the monitor." Her voice trembled. "Can't you hear it?" Marcus listened, shaking his head slowly. "It's just static, babe. You're probably hearing things. It's an old house, remember?" But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something old and forgotten. buried beneath the house. The next night, Marcus got up to check the monitor. He'd grown tired of her anxious whispers and decided it was time to see for himself. He moved quietly through the hallway, past the nursery door, but the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet stopped him. There it was again, the soft hum of a lullaby, but this time it seemed to come from below. He frowned and turned toward the crib, the source of the sound. But the room was empty. The air in the nursery felt colder than it should have. That's when he saw it. Beneath the crib, hidden in the corner of the room, was something he hadn't noticed before. A trapdoor. It was small, almost too small to be a door at all, but it was there, barely visible beneath the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered under his breath. He knelt down and ran his fingers over the edges of the trapdoor. It was old, the wood darkened with age and neglect. The faintest scent of rot wafted up from the crack, and Marcus recoiled for a moment, but his curiosity got the better of him. With a grunt, he tugged the door open. A cold gust of air rushed out from below, sending a chill down his spine. The darkness underneath was thick and impenetrable, but there was something else too. Something moving. "Lila!" he called up the stairs. "Get down here." She hurried down the hallway, her face pale. "What is it?" "Come look at this," he said, his voice tight. He knelt beside the trapdoor, peering into the dark space beneath the floorboards. There, in the shadows, something gleamed faintly. Dust-covered toys, forgotten relics of another time, and a cradle that rocked slowly, almost imperceptibly, on its own. Lila stared, her breath catching in her throat. Something about that room felt so familiar, and yet so wrong. "What is this place?" she whispered. Marcus glanced at her. "I don't know, but it's like it's been untouched for decades." And then, for the first time since they'd moved into the house, Lila felt a rush of cold recognition. This place, this room, it wasn't new to her. She knew it, deep in her bones. She had been here before, but it was a memory long buried, lost to time. She didn't want to admit it, but she could feel the pull, the connection to something ancient and forgotten. "I need to show you something," Lila said, her voice unsteady. "What?" Marcus asked, his tone now filled with concern. "What's going on?" Lila turned and led him to the attic. There, hidden behind old boxes and broken furniture, was an old photograph. It was a family portrait, one she had never seen before. In the photo, a little girl with dark eyes and a sweet smile stood beside a woman she almost recognized. The woman was holding the same cradle that rocked in the hidden room below. "Oh my God," Lila whispered, her hands trembling as she studied the photo. "It's me." Marcus's face drained of color. "What do you mean, it's you?" "It's me," Lila repeated, the realization hitting her like a punch to the stomach. "I was born here. I lived in this house. I don't remember any of it." The walls felt like they were closing in. Her past, her very life, had been hidden from her. And the worst part? The little girl in the photograph. She wasn't Lila at all. Not entirely. That night, the sounds came again, louder this time. The lullaby echoed through the monitor, but this time it wasn't just a lullaby. It was a call, a pull towards something Lila didn't understand. And then, the baby stopped crying. The next morning, Lila woke up in the nursery, the same cradle beside her, rocking gently back and forth. She reached for the baby monitor, but there was no sound, no crying, no lullabies, just silence. She looked around the room, but the baby wasn't there. And then she saw it. Beneath the crib, the trapdoor was wide open, and the shadows beneath beckoned her. Lila felt a presence behind her, cold and unsettling. It wasn't her baby anymore. The crib was empty, but something had taken its place. The forgotten child, a spirit of abandonment, had returned to reclaim what had once been its own. Years later, Marcus was gone. Dr. Rourke, the paranormal expert they'd consulted before, was nowhere to be found. And Lila? Lila had never left the room beneath the nursery. She was a child again, her memories erased, forever trapped in a cycle that couldn't be broken. The forgotten child had reclaimed what was always meant to be its, and Lila, with her fragile memory, had become the lost one, forever repeating the haunting lullaby in a house that would never forget. Story number 2. Drew Rosner wasn't one to believe in the supernatural. He was a man of logic, of reason, someone who built his life and career on concrete foundations and square angles. A well-drawn blueprint was his map, and he followed it precisely. That's why, when he was handed the contract to renovate an old government building, he saw it as just another project, a way to make a name for himself. Nothing more. The building, located on the outskirts of town, had been abandoned for years. Its halls were filled with dust, its rooms empty except for the lingering smell of mildew. But Drew didn't mind. He was used to working in forgotten spaces, and this job promised to be no different from any of the others. He sat in his office. Late one evening, the old blueprints spread across his desk. It was an archive of plans for the building, drawings, notes, specifications. As he ran his finger over the paper, his eyes stopped at something unexpected. There, in the corner of one of the original blueprints, was a handwritten addition. The line was faint, almost as if it had been added as an afterthought or covered up intentionally. The words read, "Room 237. Do not enter." Drew frowned. He'd gone over the building plans with Lydia, the blueprint archivist, and none of the modern maps showed a room labeled as such. He had never heard of Room 237, and more importantly, no one had mentioned it. Curiosity gnawed at him. The next day, Drew decided to visit the building himself. He took the blueprints with him, determined to find the elusive Room 237. Lydia had warned him when he picked up the job, mentioning how the place had an unsettling history, but he had dismissed her concerns. Now, the room's mysterious designation was too much for him to ignore. Inside the building, Drew walked through the cavernous hallways, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The building was a maze of forgotten corridors, most of which had been sealed off years ago. The air was stale, thick with dust, and the silence seemed to press against him. He followed the blueprints to the spot where Room 237 was marked, but there was nothing. Just a long stretch of empty hallway and a wall that looked like every other one. It took him a moment to notice the difference. A faint outline of a door, almost invisible, hidden behind a fake wall. His pulse quickened. Drew stepped forward and pushed against the wall. It creaked, groaned, and then swung open. The space behind it was small, tight. A narrow corridor leading to a door that was no longer solid, but a rusted frame with shattered glass. Inside, the room felt wrong. The air was heavier, and the shadows seemed to shift in strange ways, like something was just on the edge of his vision, waiting. He hesitated, but his curiosity was too strong to fight. The room was bare, save for strange, unsettling marks on the walls. Thousands of tally marks, etched into the surface one after another. It was as if someone had counted meticulously for years. Drew moved further into the room, and his eyes caught something else. A row of mirrors, each one facing inward, reflecting nothing but dark, empty spaces. And then he saw the bloodstains. They were everywhere. On the floor, on the walls, on the mirrors themselves. It looked like they'd never dried, as though the blood had soaked into the very foundation of the room. Drew's heart raced. His hands trembled as he reached out to touch one of the mirrors, but before he could, something shifted. The reflection in the glass didn't match his movements. It wasn't his face that stared back, but something else. Something darker, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. "Hello, Drew," the thing whispered. The voice was soft, but unmistakable. It felt like it was inside his head, crawling beneath his skin. In a panic, Drew turned and ran. He stumbled out of the room, his mind racing. What had he just seen? What kind of twisted experiment had taken place here? He rushed back to his car, his hands still shaking as he fumbled for the keys. The drive home felt like it took an eternity, the darkness pressing in on him. When he finally made it inside his house, he thought he could breathe again. The weight of what he'd seen still pressed down on him, but it felt distant, like it was part of a dream he could shake off. But as the days passed, the feeling never left. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't focus. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him, watching him, and then it started. Small things at first, a glimpse of movement in the corner of his vision, objects out of place, shadows where there shouldn't be. It wasn't until the mirrors started to change that Drew truly understood what had happened. One night, as he sat alone in his living room, his reflection in the mirror caught his eye. At first, he thought he'd imagined it, but there it was again, a dark figure standing behind him, just out of sight. Drew spun around, but the room was empty. He turned back to the mirror, his heart pounding. The figure was still there, now moving closer, its hollow eyes locked on his. "You can't escape," it whispered. That's when Drew realized. The thing in the mirror wasn't just following him. It was him. A piece of him had been taken and left behind in room 237. It had attached itself to him, and now it would never let go. Desperation took over. Drew called Milo, the renovation contractor who had been working with him on the building. He needed help, someone who could understand what was happening. Milo arrived the next day, looking confused when Drew explained what he had found in room 237. He didn't understand, but Drew wasn't sure he did either. No one did. That's when Drew called Mr. Raines, a survivor of the original government experiment. Raines had been one of the few to make it out alive, though barely. When Drew reached out to him, the old man spoke in a voice cracked with age and fear. "Room 237. You found it, didn't you?" Raines rasped. "That room wasn't for building anything. It was for breaking things, breaking minds, breaking souls. It wasn't just a government project. It was something worse, something they never meant to unleash." As Raines spoke, Drew felt the panic rise again. Whatever was in room 237 wasn't just a relic of the past. It was alive, and it was still feeding. The next night, Drew couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, spiraling deeper into fear. The shadows in his house seemed to grow longer, darker. Drew knew what he had to do. In the dead of night, he grabbed a crowbar, a hammer, and a sledgehammer. He tore down the walls of his house, driven by the need to find the thing that had followed him home. He pounded at the drywall, searching for any crack, any hidden door, any place where it could be hiding, but there was nothing. The mirrors still reflected his face, his own dark reflection staring back, mocking him. The house was silent. The thing was gone. Or was it? Drew's mind was unraveling, the fear gnawing at him. It was only a matter of time before it came back. That much he knew, and as he sat in the ruins of his own home, he realized the truth. The room wasn't just a place. It was a part of him now, a part he could never escape. And wherever he went, whatever walls he tore down, it would follow. Because Room 237 was inside him forever. Story number 3. Kayla Moore had never believed in ghosts. She was smart, practical, and didn't have time for the silly stories people told about haunted houses. But the mansion they had just moved into wasn't just any house. It was old, really old, and it seemed to have a life of its own. Her mom, a historian, had found the house by chance. It had been abandoned for years, the kind of place that no one wanted to touch, except for a few whispers in the local town about it being strange. For Kayla's mom, the house was a perfect project. She could restore it, learn its history, and maybe even write a book about it. Her dad, on the other hand, was too distracted by his work to care about anything but the quiet. So, it was up to Kayla to make sense of it all. The house was impressive, massive even. It was a Victorian mansion with ivy creeping up its walls, long hallways and towering windows that let in too much light during the day and far too little at night. It was easy to get lost in, even for someone who prided themselves on their sense of direction. The real problem, though, was the rumor that the house only had 12 rooms. Every time someone mentioned it, either in passing or in a whispering way, as if it was some sort of unspoken rule, Kayla felt a little uneasy. She had no idea why. It was just a rumor. Or was it? The storm came one night, just as she was finishing unpacking her things. Rain hammered against the windows, and thunder rumbled so loud it seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. As the wind howled outside, Kayla's curiosity got the better of her. She decided to explore the house a little further. With a flashlight in hand, she wandered through the long, dark halls. The house creaked and groaned, the sounds of it settling in a way that made her skin crawl. She reached the grand staircase, its banister worn and smooth from years of use. But as she was about to go up, she noticed something strange. There was a door she hadn't seen before, sitting quietly at the far end of the hall. It looked like any other door in the house, but it shouldn't have been there. She had already counted all the doors earlier in the day, just to make sure. She wasn't imagining things. There were 12, and yet here was the 13th door. Kayla reached out and hesitated for just a moment. Something tugged at her, a strange sensation she couldn't quite place. The door creaked open as if it were welcoming her inside. The room was small, cozy even. It was unlike the rest of the house, which felt vast and empty. The walls were lined with dusty bookshelves, and in the middle of the room was an old wooden desk with a single journal sitting open on top. Kayla stepped forward, her fingers brushing over the leather cover. Something inside her stirred, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The journal was old, really old. The pages were yellowed, the writing faded, but as she flipped it open, the first few words caught her eye. I woke up today, as I have for so many years. I am trapped in this house, and the room keeps me here. It calls to me, always, pulling me back when I try to leave. I wonder if I will ever escape. The handwriting was beautiful, flowing, and familiar. It was as if it belonged to her, as though it was her own. Kayla's heart skipped a beat. She flipped the page, reading more. I fear I am losing myself. Every night the house shifts, and I lose time. I remember things that didn't happen. My reflection changes, my voice sounds different, and sometimes I hear someone calling my name. Is it me? Or is it someone else? The writing went on, but it was the final sentence that made Kayla stop. I look in the mirror and see myself, but it is not me. It is her, the girl who will take my place. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the words. The girl who will take my place. She felt dizzy. Her reflection, her own face, flashed in her mind. The girl In the journal, she looked exactly like her. The door slammed shut behind her, breaking the spell. Kayla jumped, her heart hammering in her chest. The storm outside was louder now, and the room seemed to close in on her. When she rushed to the door, it wouldn't open. She pulled and pulled, but it was stuck, almost as if something invisible was holding it shut. Panic set in. Finally, with a crash, the door burst open and Kayla stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. She stood there for a moment, her mind racing. What had just happened? Why had the room appeared? And who was the girl in the journal? The next few days were a blur. Kayla tried to forget about the room, but the more she tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to call to her. Each night she returned to the house's winding halls, only to find that the door to room 13 had disappeared. And each time she woke up, something was different. At first, it was small things. She remembered a conversation she hadn't had. She knew about things she couldn't possibly know. Her mom found her scribbling notes about the house, notes that didn't make sense. And then, one morning, she woke up, feeling older. Her reflection in the mirror looked the same, but her eyes felt tired, like they had seen too much. It was Lily, her younger sister, who noticed it first. She began seeing things. Whispers in the dark. A girl standing in the corner of the room when no one else was there. Kayla's heart sank when Lily pointed to an old photo in the attic and said, "That's the girl. She's the one who's been following you." Kayla couldn't deny it anymore. The girl in the photo, the girl who had lived there in 1892, looked exactly like her. The storm raged again on her 18th birthday. The house seemed alive with energy, and Kayla felt a pull, a tug deep inside her chest. She couldn't stop herself. She had to go back to the room. When she stepped into the 13th room that night, she didn't feel fear. She felt familiar, like it was the place she had always belonged. The journal lay open on the desk, its pages waiting for her. The moment she touched it, she felt time twist around her. The house seemed to breathe, as if it were alive, and the air thickened. The door to the room slammed shut, and this time, Kayla didn't fight it. The next morning, the house was quiet. When the new family arrived with their own daughter, they walked through the halls, unaware of the hidden door that would appear when the storm came. The girl, staring wide-eyed, was the same age Kayla had been, and when she counted the doors, there was still 13. Some houses never forget their past, and sometimes the past never lets go. Story number 4. Nora Keene had never imagined that the apartment she inherited from her grandmother would become her prison. It was a place filled with ghosts, of the past, of memories, of things she wished she could forget. She'd been a comic artist once, back when her life had some kind of direction, but now she spent her days in a haze of cheap wine and half-finished sketches. The world outside felt like a blur, and she didn't care enough to focus on anything. The apartment wasn't much, small, cluttered, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors. The walls, though, were sturdy. And one day, during a half-hearted attempt to renovate the place and maybe make it feel like home again, she knocked down a wall in the small storage room off the kitchen. It had always seemed strange to her, the way the room was cut off from the rest of the apartment, its only door hidden behind an old bookshelf, but she'd never thought to question it. Until now. The hammer struck the wall with a sharp crack, and the dust swirled around her as the plaster gave way. Behind the debris, she saw it, an 808 room, sealed off from the world. It looked untouched, like it had been hidden away for years. Nora stepped back, her heart pounding, a sick curiosity twisting in her gut. The room was completely soundproof. Not a whisper of noise could escape from it. The walls were covered in what looked like charcoal drawings, hundreds of them. Some were strange, eerie images, distorted faces, blurred shapes, and others looked like they were drawn with intent, with obsession. She reached out, running her fingers over the surface of one drawing. It was a picture of a woman, sleeping, her face peaceful, but something about the way the woman's eyes were drawn made her skin crawl. Nora pulled her hand back as though the drawing had burned her. She stepped back and surveyed the room, feeling a wave of unease wash over her. Why had it been hidden away? And who had drawn these? She couldn't stop herself. The artist in her, the one who used to pour her soul into her work, urged her to take a closer look. Nora spent hours in that room. She sat down on the floor, sketchbook in hand, trying to make sense of what was before her. Some of the drawings seemed familiar, like they were of her. A picture of a woman crying, her face smeared with charcoal tears. Another of her lying in a bed, eyes wide open, staring into something just beyond the page. The drawings were unsettling, yes, but Nora couldn't look away. That night she slept fitfully, her mind racing. She dreamed of the room, of the drawings, of the face in them. But when she woke up the next morning, something was different. The drawing had changed. The woman in the bed, her, was now crying. Her eyes were wide as if in terror. And the room in the picture looked exactly like the one she had just been in. Nora's breath caught in her throat. She had to be imagining things, right? She must have subconsciously sketched it while half asleep. But when she looked at her sketchbook, the page had no signs of her own hand. No stray marks, no unfinished lines. It was the same. The next night, it happened again. She had only spent a few minutes in the room after dinner, and when she went back to sleep, the drawings had changed again. This time, the woman was lying still, eyes wide open with a twisted, unnatural smile on her face. And the room was darker, as though the shadows in it were reaching out. The air in the apartment started to feel thick, like it was pressing in on her. She couldn't focus on her own work, couldn't escape the heavy weight of the room. Each time she woke up, there was more to the drawing. More of her. More of what was happening to her. It wasn't just the drawings. She started hearing things. Whispers at night, faint sounds of scratching. The walls seemed to echo with voices. But when she turned around, no one was there. Sometimes she would wake up in the middle of the night, cold sweat covering her skin, and she would find herself standing in front of the wall, staring at the drawings in a trance. Her ex-boyfriend Alex called one evening, after a few too many missed texts and phone calls. "Nora, you good?" he asked, sounding more worried than he ever had before. "You've been kind of off lately. What's going on with you?" She didn't know how to explain it. The drawings, the whispering, the way the room seemed to be getting closer to her, pressing in on her every time she closed her eyes. She wanted to say it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaking. I'm working through something." But Alex wasn't convinced. "You sure? You don't sound fine. I think you need to get out of there, Nora. Whatever's happening, it's not healthy." She hung up, her heart heavy. But she didn't want to leave. She couldn't. She was addicted to the room, to the drawings. The more she stared at them, the more they seemed to demand something from her. As if each stroke of the charcoal was calling her deeper, pulling her into the twisted world it was creating. The next morning, she woke up and went to the wall again. The drawings had changed again. Now they showed her, lying in the same position as the night before, but this time her eyes were closed. And the room, it was darker than ever before. The shadows in the corner of the room had lengthened, stretching toward her like fingers. And then a new drawing appeared. This one was different. The woman, her, was lying in the bed, smiling. She had a serene, almost peaceful expression, but it wasn't her smile. It wasn't real. Nora screamed. The sound filled the apartment, and for the first time in days, the room felt still, silent. Her neighbor, Claire, knocked on the door, her face pale. "I heard scratching," she said, voice trembling. "Is everything okay?" Nora looked at her, unable to find words. Claire didn't need to know. She didn't need to see what was happening to her. No one needed to see. But the drawing had already changed again. This time, there was no bed, no walls, only a large, empty void, darker than night. Nora stood in the middle of the room, trembling. Her fingers brushed against the paper, but her mind was elsewhere, consumed by the images that surrounded her. The voices in her head whispered again, calling her to finish it, to draw the final picture. She began to sketch, her hand moving faster than she could control, as if the room was guiding her. She didn't know how long it took, but when the final stroke was made, the air in the room felt cold, empty, and then the door slammed shut. Nora's body was found 2 days later, still inside the sealed room. Her eyes were wide open, a frozen smile on her face, and in the final panel on the wall, the drawing of her, smiling, was complete. The room had finished her story, and it was waiting for the next artist to find it. Some walls, when knocked down, never let the past go. Story number 5. Jacob Reed had always been the type to keep to himself. As a freshman at college, he was anxious but independent. The small town far from home felt like a fresh start, a chance to escape everything he'd left behind. So, when the opportunity came up to rent a cheap, off-campus apartment, he jumped at it. It was old and a little run down, but it was his own space. No roommates, no nosy neighbors, just him, alone with his thoughts, and that's how he liked it. At first, the apartment was quiet. The creaky floors, the thin walls, the draft that seemed to never leave. It was the perfect place to retreat after classes, away from the chaos of campus life. But as the nights wore on, something changed. It started with soft sounds, footsteps, faint at first, like someone walking around the apartment while he was trying to sleep. Jacob brushed it off as his imagination, the house settling, maybe. But then, there were more sounds. Drawers opening and closing by themselves, whispers that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. He told himself it was just the building. It was old, after all. It could be anything. Pipes, the wind, anything but what it felt like. Something alive. One night, after he'd been lying in bed for hours trying to ignore the unsettling noises, he decided to investigate. He stood up, heart pounding, and made his way to the source of the sound, the closet. He'd never paid much attention to it before. Just a small, dusty space with a few shelves and clothes hanging haphazardly. But something felt off. A faint draft escaped from behind the closet wall, something Jacob had never noticed before. His fingers fumbled along the edges of the wall, searching for something. Anything that might explain the strange sensation. That's when he found it. A small false panel hidden behind the closet. His heart raced as he pried it open. The panel moved with an odd resistance, and when it finally gave way, he stared into the darkness beyond. Behind the panel was a small, hidden room. Barely large, enough for a person to stand upright in. The walls were bare, except for a few scattered items. Old clothes, empty food wrappers, and strange markings on the floor, like someone had been pacing. It looked like someone had lived there. Maybe not recently, but for long enough to leave. Behind a trail? A chill ran down Jacob's spine as he stepped into the room. There was no way it was a storage space. No, this was something different, something deliberate. He backed out of the room, his breath shallow, but when he turned to leave, he noticed something on the floor, a scrap of paper. It was folded neatly, as if it had been placed there deliberately. He opened it carefully, his hands trembling. The message was simple, but chilling. "Welcome home, Jacob. I've been waiting." Jacob's skin prickled, but he tried to laugh it off. It was probably a prank from one of the previous tenants, maybe someone who had spent too much time in that cramped space, but something about the note gnawed at him. He shoved it in his pocket and quickly sealed the hidden room behind the panel, determined not to think about it. But it didn't end there. The next night, after he'd settled in for bed, the noises returned. The soft footsteps, the whispers, but this time they felt closer. His heart raced as he lay in the dark, listening. Then a new sound, scratching at his closet door just beyond his reach. He lay there, frozen, unsure whether to run or confront whatever it was. The scratching stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. But then, in the quiet, a voice whispered, so close it felt like it was right beside him. "Don't leave. Jacob, we're family now." Jacob bolted out of bed, his pulse racing. He grabbed his phone and called his best friend Sam, but the call went straight to voicemail. He paced around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the apartment was just messing with him. Maybe it was all in his head. But that night, he couldn't sleep. The next morning, everything was calm, as if the strange presence had retreated. No more whispers, no more footsteps. It was just another normal day. He tried to ignore the unease that still crawled beneath his skin. But the days passed, and the whispers kept coming. Each night, they grew louder, more persistent. Jacob's thoughts became clouded, his once clear mind now filled with the constant, nagging presence of whatever or whoever was in the apartment with him. He began to feel its weight, like a constant shadow following him everywhere he went. Then, one evening, something happened that he couldn't ignore. The door to his apartment creaked open on its own. Jacob was sitting on the couch, reading, when the sound stopped him cold. He froze, staring at the door. No one was there, but the door had definitely opened. He stood slowly, heart pounding, and made his way to the door, his feet dragging across the floor. Then, just as he reached it, the door slammed shut behind him. He whipped around, eyes wide, breath shallow, but there was nothing there. The whispers started again, louder this time, as if they were coming from inside the walls, from behind the closet. He didn't want to go back to that room, but he knew he had to. Something in him told him he had no choice. When he opened the false panel again, the hidden room was different. The clothes were gone. The wrappers, too. In their place were new items, things Jacob didn't recognize. A plate of half-eaten food, a pair of worn shoes, a book, open to a page with the words, "Don't leave. You're mine now." Panic surged through him. He ran out of the room, slamming the panel shut, but the voice didn't stop. It was in his head now, echoing in his thoughts. He had to get out. He had to leave before it took him, before whatever it was finished its work. But when he tried to pack his things, he couldn't. His body wouldn't let him. He couldn't leave. Not now. Not when it had already marked him. The next day, his neighbor Tori knocked on his door. She looked concerned, her eyes wide with fear. "Jacob, have you seen the girl next door?" she asked. Jacob shook his head. "What do you mean? What girl?" "The one who lived in that apartment last year," Tori said, voice trembling. She vanished. No one knows where she went, but but I think she was like me. She knew about it, about the roommate. Jacob froze. What do you mean, the roommate? But before Tori could answer, the door slammed shut again. That night, Jacob stayed up, unable to rest, too afraid to even close his eyes. The room was still there, invisible during the day but physical at night. It fed on him, on his fear, on his loneliness. It didn't want him to leave. It didn't want him to graduate. It wanted him to stay forever. The next morning, there was a note on his bed. Welcome home. I've been waiting. And in the corner of the note, it was signed, your new roommate. Jacob was never seen again. His phone was found next to his bed, the last message still visible. I can't leave. A few months later, a new student moved in, curious about the low rent. She found the hidden room, the same note, and the whispers that followed her, and Jacob's note remained, waiting for the next tenant. Story number 6. Marla Caro had always been a woman of quiet habits, one who found comfort in the dusty smell of old pages and the hum of fluorescent lights that filled the library she'd worked in for the last 15 years. The building was crumbling, its once grand shelves now sagging with age and the weight of forgotten books. It was slated for demolition, the final blow in a slow decay that had begun years before. Marla wasn't bothered by it. She had no attachment to the library itself. What mattered to her was preserving the stories within it, keeping them safe from the ravages of time. She was the archivist, the keeper of forgotten knowledge, a solitary figure who spent her days cataloging the past and organizing the future. It was a lonely existence, but one she'd long grown accustomed to. On one particularly quiet afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the cracks in the windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the room, Marla made a startling discovery. She was in the back corner of the library behind a row of neglected bookshelves when she noticed something odd. A rusted iron door stood hidden in the shadows. It wasn't on any of the blueprints she hadn't been there before. Marla felt a flicker of unease crawl up her spine, but her curiosity outweighed it. She pried the door open with a creak, her fingers tracing the cool metal before it finally gave way. Behind the door was a small, windowless room, dark and musty. It smelled like dust and mildew, like something that hadn't been touched in a century. The space was packed with shelves, shelves upon shelves of books. The books were old, their spines cracked and covered in what appeared to be brown, leathery material. Something about the books made Marla pause, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She ran a finger along one of the spines and recoiled, when she realized that the leather wasn't leather at all. It was skin. She pulled her hand back, her breath catching in her throat. The books were bound in human skin. The names on the spines were written in faded gold lettering, each one etched with a different name. As Marla scanned the shelves, she realized with a sickening twist in her gut that each book bore the name of someone who was still alive. People she recognized from her own life, her colleagues, her neighbors, her family. Her fingers shook as she reached for one of the books, drawn inexplicably to it. The title read, Evelyn Crawford. Marla opened the book, her heart pounding in her chest. The pages inside were blank, but as she flipped through them, a sharp pain shot through her chest, making her gasp for air. She slammed the book shut, her heart racing, but the pain continued to pulse through her like an electric shock, coursing through her veins. She felt a pressure build behind her eyes, like she was suffocating. With trembling hands, she set the book down and backed away. The pain subsided, but something felt different. The room felt darker, colder, as if it had shifted, as though something else was there with her. Marla turned and ran back to the door, her breath ragged. She didn't look back until she was safely outside the room, panting in the hallway. Her head was spinning, her mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. What were those books? What was happening to her? Over the next few days, Marla found herself returning to the room again and again. She couldn't stop herself. It was as though something was calling to her, pulling her toward the room where the books waited. She opened more of them, each one filled with strange and unsettling descriptions of pain. People she knew were suffering in ways she could never have imagined. Physical torment, mental anguish, endless torment. Each book was a chronicle of real-world suffering, the pain transcribed into the pages. And then, one day, Marla found a book with her own name on it, Marla Caro. Her stomach dropped as she opened the book. The pages were filled with detailed descriptions of her life, her actions, her emotions. Each chapter was like a diary, tracking her every movement, her every thought, as if someone had been watching her for years. And then she saw it, the last page, a blank space with only one sentence written at the top. Marla Caro, last day. Marla's heart slammed against her chest as a cold sweat broke out on her skin. She turned the page, her hands trembling, but the words began to change in front of her eyes. The sentences were writing themselves, as though the book was feeding on her very existence, documenting her pain, her suffering, and her eventual demise. Her body felt heavy as the words began to blur in front of her eyes, her mind unraveling. Her breathing became shallow, the room closing in on her. Something was changing inside her, a twisting, pulling sensation deep in her gut. She could feel the ink soaking into her skin, wrapping around her like a prison. The pain was unbearable. She screamed, but no sound came out. The books were alive, and they were feeding on her. Desperate, she tried to close the book, but it wouldn't shut. Instead, it opened wider, the words now bleeding across, the pages, ink spilling over the edges. The book was consuming her. She could feel it, the darkness inside the room pulling her in. As the days went on, she began to lose herself. Her body became a canvas for the torment written in her book. She couldn't stop it. It was as if her very soul was being siphoned away, the ink soaking into her like a virus. The book was no longer just a record. It was alive, and it was rewriting her story. It wasn't long before Marla realized that someone else was writing in her book now. The ink wasn't her own, but it was still forming in the same chaotic, feverish scrawl. The curator, the one who had written the others, was writing in hers now. She was no longer the author of her own story. It was only a matter of time before the last page was filled. And when it was, she knew what would happen. Her body was no longer her own. It was just another book on the shelf. Her soul would be trapped, her screams inked into every page. Forever. A few weeks later, Dr. Ellison, an occult scholar who had been following the rumors about the library, came to investigate. When he opened the iron door, he found the room filled with books bound in human skin. And on the shelf, there was one book missing, the one with Marla's name on it. He turned the page of the book that was left on the shelf, the one titled The Archivist's Door. Inside, he found a message, freshly inked. Welcome, Dr. Ellison. The curator has been waiting for you. And the last line, written in desperate scrawl, don't read it. Don't open the book. But it was too late. Story number 7. Elise Tran woke up to a headache that felt like someone had hammered a spike into her temple. The kind of headache you get after an all-night binge, except she couldn't remember drinking or staying up. She was on her back, staring at a ceiling that was too white, too clean. Her first instinct was to sit up, but when she tried, panic gripped her chest. The room was small, sterile. Everything was too sharp, too cold, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. It took a few seconds for her to realize there was no door. The room had 4 walls, each blank and featureless. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. Her body felt like it was stuck in some sort of vacuum, a thin layer of sweat on her skin. She wasn't alone. Around her, 5 strangers lay on the floor, just like her. Elise scanned them, her eyes flitting between them as her mind kicked into overdrive. There was Milo, a rugged-looking ex-soldier with a tired face. Anya, an influencer, wearing a pastel hoodie and a perfectly painted face. Kenneth, a retired teacher with glasses and a puzzled frown. And Riley, a teen who looked about as confused as she felt. One by one, they stirred, groaning and stretching like they'd just woken from a dream. No one said anything at first. Everyone was trying to get a grip on their surroundings. But then, the voice came, a smooth, emotionless tone, like it had been trained to speak calmly and with precision. You are in a controlled environment. You will remain here until the test is complete. There is no exit. Elise felt her stomach twist. She opened her mouth to speak, but the voice interrupted again. One of you may leave. The rest will remain. You must obey the test's rules. Only one will survive. The silence that followed was thick with confusion, dread, and the sharp sting of adrenaline. Elise's claustrophobia hit her in a rush, and she fought the instinct to scream. The walls felt closer now, pressing in. A quiet hum filled the space, almost imperceptible, but persistent. What the hell is this? Milo's voice broke the silence. He sounded calm, but Elise could tell he was just as lost as everyone else. Is this some kind of joke? Anya asked, her voice shaky but laced with the kind of defensive disbelief that only a person who lived online could have. She reached for her phone, as if checking for a signal could solve this mess. I don't think this is a joke, Kenneth muttered. He stood up and tried tapping on the walls. It's real. I don't understand what's going on. I don't get it, Riley whispered, barely audible, his eyes wide and haunted. How are we supposed to get out? Elise swallowed, hard, trying to keep her own panic at bay. She needed answers, not chaos. She had to focus. Focus. The voice came again, colder this time. The test will begin shortly. Your emotions will dictate the outcome. Fear, anger, and doubt will alter the environment. Only one will leave, but you must make the right choice. The rest will disappear. The lights flickered for a moment. Elise's heart skipped a beat. Disappear? What do you mean, disappear? Milo demanded, his voice rising. The anger in it felt real, thick, like a punch to the air. Elise saw his muscles tense, his body reacting to the growing unease. Without warning, the room began to change. The walls seemed to stretch and the floor tilted just slightly. It was as if the space was warping around them, responding to Milo's outburst. Elise stumbled, the ground feeling suddenly uneven beneath her feet. The others were equally thrown, off balance. Anya let out a strangled gasp and caught herself on one of the walls, but it felt wrong. What the hell is happening? She shouted. I don't know, Elise cried back, her voice sharp with panic. The lights flickered again, and this time the room didn't stop moving. It felt like the air itself was alive and watching. Elise had never felt so small, so vulnerable. It wasn't just the claustrophobia anymore. It was something else, something far worse. As time passed, the room seemed to learn them. Every emotion, every reaction they had fed the room. It wasn't just responding to the sound of their voices, it was reacting to their deepest fears, to the panic buried deep in their minds. One by one, their worst nightmares began to manifest. Milo, the tough soldier, was the first to break. The walls around him turned to bars, trapping him inside a cage, suffocating him in his own isolation. He banged against the bars, screaming for help, but the room twisted further, bending his sense of time. His cries echoed, stretching and distorting until they became an endless loop. Kenneth, the teacher, began to panic, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. His hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to find a way out, but the room responded by warping the space, stretching it so that every door, every window turned into endless hallways that led nowhere. He collapsed, his body trembling as he became trapped in a maze that was constantly shifting. Anya, the influencer, seemed to be the next to crack. She'd tried to keep her cool at first, but the room fed on her fear of rejection, of being forgotten. Her image started to warp in the mirrors, twisting into grotesque versions of herself. The lights flickered again and she screamed, her cries drowning in the shifting space. Elise saw her face, eyes wide with terror, before she vanished completely, as if she had never existed at all. Riley, the quiet teen, wasn't far behind. His fear of abandonment turned into a nightmare. He began to see himself aging, his body deteriorating before his eyes, his skin sagging, his hair turning gray. His screams were guttural, desperate. But when Elise tried to reach for him, he was gone. Elise was alone now, completely alone. The room had bent time. It had twisted space. It was using their fears to break them down, one by one. But Elise hadn't broken. Not yet. She hadn't given in. And then the voice returned, calm as ever. You are the last. You have endured. The test is almost complete. Elise's chest heaved as she sank to the ground. She was exhausted, emotionally drained. The terror of losing everyone, the fear of what was happening, was consuming her. She was the last one standing, but she didn't want to win this. She didn't want to be the one who walked out of the room. She wanted answers. She wanted to know why. But then, in a moment of clarity, she realized something. The test wasn't about survival. It was about obedience. Her instincts kicked in. The room didn't want her to survive. It wanted her to surrender. She had to leave. She had to obey. The floor shifted, opening up before her like an exit. But Elise hesitated. She wanted to scream, to lash out at the room for all it had done, for all the pain it had caused. But something told her it wasn't real. It was just another test. In that moment, the room flickered and Elise felt the strangest sensation, like she was being pulled back in time to a place she couldn't remember. When she took a step forward, she suddenly found herself back where she started, back in the sterile, hidden room. The walls felt like they were closing in again. The voice spoke, soft and final. Welcome back, Elise. The test is never over. And Elise understood then. The room wasn't a prison. It wasn't a test. It was just a place where the broken were forgotten, and she would never leave. Story number 8. Carl Densmore had worked the night shift at the Budget Inn for nearly 14 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the faded carpet and peeling wallpaper. The quiet of the hotel at night was its own kind of comfort, one that allowed Carl to avoid the noise of the world. He wasn't a man of excitement or risk. He was content with the humdrum routine of checking guests in, answering calls, and keeping things running until morning. Life had settled into a predictable rhythm, and that suited him just fine. But tonight was different. The night started like any other. The lobby was empty, save for a few scattered patrons in the corner booth nursing cold coffee. Carl had just poured himself a mug when the bell over the front door rang. A guest. Carl looked up. The man was tall, dressed in a long coat despite the mild weather outside. His eyes were strange, dark, almost unnaturally deep, and they seemed to look right through Carl as if seeing something behind him. He was clean-shaven, with a distant, tired expression. "I have a reservation," the man said, his voice low and smooth. Carl glanced at the desk computer. "Name?" "Arthur Lyle," the man answered without hesitation. Carl typed it in, scanning the screen. "No reservation." He frowned. "Sorry, sir. There's no reservation under that name." Arthur's eyes seemed to narrow slightly, though his expression never changed. "I was assigned room 0. Carl blinked. "Room 0? Room 0, Arthur repeated, his voice a little firmer. "It's in the registry. You'll find it." Carl's stomach turned slightly. He was used to people trying to pull all sorts of tricks at this late hour, scamming for a free room, getting something on the cheap. But this was new. He checked the system again. The Budget Inn had 30 rooms, numbered 1 through 30. There was no room 0. "I'm sorry, sir," Carl said, his voice laced with confusion. "We don't have a room 0. Maybe there's been some mistake." Arthur didn't seem surprised by the response. He just smiled, though it wasn't the kind of smile that made Carl feel at ease. It was cold, like someone who already knew what was coming. "I'm not mistaken," Arthur said softly. "Check the registry. You'll see." Carl didn't want to engage further, but something about the man's demeanor nagged at him. With a sigh, he turned back to the desk computer. He pulled up the old ledger file, the one with handwritten entries from years ago. The Budget Inn had been around for decades, and the old records were stored in the system as a kind of backup, though Carl hadn't opened them in ages. His fingers hovered over the mouse, a sense of unease creeping up his spine. When he clicked on the file and scrolled back, his eyes froze. Room 0, the registry, wasn't just a glitch, it was real, and there were entries stretching back for over 100 years. The names were odd. Alfred Hardy, 1923, Mabel West, 1947, Thomas Clark, 1961. All of them were checked into room 0, a room that shouldn't even exist. "Damn it," Carl muttered under his breath, his heart racing. He had no explanation, and the hairs on his neck were starting to prickle. He turned back to Arthur, who was standing quietly by the counter, his eyes still locked on Carl. "Ruin Dingro is real," Arthur said, his voice now almost gentle, as if he were explaining something Carl should have already known. "You just have to find it." Carl's throat tightened. The room didn't exist. And yet, it did. A part of his mind screamed that he should refuse, that he should send the man away and pretend none of this had happened. But another part of him, the part that had lived through too many nights of boredom and routine, was drawn to it. He gestured to Arthur. "Follow me." Carl led the man down the dark hallway. As they passed room 1, Carl glanced at the old wooden door, its chipped paint and rusted handle. It had always felt heavy, oppressive somehow, but he'd never given it much thought. Now, the thought of room 0 filled him with dread. Between rooms 1 and 2, Carl felt it. Something hidden. He had never noticed it before, but there it was, faintly, visible as a seam in the wall. His breath caught. There was a door. He reached for it, his hand shaking. The knob turned easily, and the door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. It wasn't an empty room. No, it was a place of memories. Carl stepped inside, followed by Arthur. As soon as they entered, the air changed. The silence pressed in on Carl like a weight. He felt a sharp chill creep down his spine. Something was wrong here. This wasn't just a hidden room. It felt like a doorway to something much worse. The room wasn't empty. It was full of shadows, the faint outlines of people standing still, their faces obscured. Then, without warning, the room flickered like a bad signal on an old television. The shadows vanished, and Carl found himself staring at a scene that looked almost familiar. A man in a cheap suit stood behind a counter, checking in guests. His face was pale, tired. Carl blinked. It was him. It was Carl. "Welcome to the Budget Inn," the figure of Carl said, his voice hollow, distant. "How can I help you?" the scene repeated, looping like a broken record. Carl watched in horror as his own death played out before him, over and over again. In each iteration, he watched himself die. He saw a violent argument erupt, guests screaming, and then a blinding flash of pain before everything went black. His body lay lifeless behind the counter, yet somehow each time he reappeared, alive again. He reached for the door to escape, but it slammed shut, locking him in. The voice on the speaker crackled. "The test is not about survival. It is about obedience." Carl's breath quickened. The scene started again, and this time he wasn't alone. The shadows had faces, guests from the past, their eyes wide with terror, their hands reaching for him, whispering his name. They were all trapped in the loop, just like him. He turned to Arthur, who was now standing calmly by the door, as if nothing were amiss. Arthur's smile was colder than before, like a man who knew the rules of this twisted game too well. "It's time for you to join them," Arthur said softly, almost pityingly. Carl turned back to the room, but the faces in the shadows were closing in. He felt the weight of his own past mistakes, his regrets, and all the decisions that had led him here. This was his punishment. This was his forever. And then, with a sharp crack, Carl's body was once again lifeless behind the counter. His eyes remained wide open, staring into nothingness. But the scene never stopped. The room never stopped. The next morning, Dolores, the cleaning lady, walked past room 1 with her broom and mop, her hands shaking slightly as she caught a glimpse of the hidden door. She'd heard the rumors of the Budget Inn's dark past, but she had always refused to clean near room 1. It was too much. Today, however, she couldn't ignore it. She stepped closer, her curiosity getting the best of her. The door was open. She peered inside and saw Carl, staring back at her, lifeless yet somehow still working behind the counter. His eyes were vacant, the same empty look he'd had for years. And in the corner, she heard a voice whispering through the walls. "Welcome to the Budget Inn. How can I help you?" And Carl was waiting, just as he had always been. Story number 9. Theo Marin had always been drawn to the dark, the mysterious, the things people whispered about in dark corners of the internet. The thrill of uncovering something twisted, something hidden, something that would get him clicks and views. As an aspiring vlogger, he'd done his fair share of creepy, abandoned places and ghost hunts. But when he heard about the Red Room, he knew this would be the story that would make him famous. It was an urban legend in the true crime circles. A house out in the woods, abandoned for years, where something terrible had happened. A haunted house, sure, but what made it special was the rumors surrounding a live stream that had once been broadcast from inside. The so-called Red Room was an invitation-only stream on the dark web, where viewers watched people be tortured and killed. The house had been raided, shut down by authorities, but the room had never been found. Some said it had been destroyed. Others said it was still out there, waiting for someone to unlock it. Theo's fingers itched as he sat in front of his camera. This was his big break, the story he'd been searching for. "All right, people, we're about to enter the infamous Red Room," Theo said, talking to the camera. Jen, his girlfriend and tech helper, stood by the equipment making sure everything was set up. This is the spot. The house where it all happened. Jen shot him a look. Are you sure about this, Theo? The cops have been here before. Vic said it was dangerous. Theo shrugged, adjusting his camera. Come on, Jen. This is what we've been waiting for. If I find something, we'll get millions of views. This could put us on the map. Jen hesitated, but didn't say anything more. She had always supported Theo, even when his ambitions pushed him too far. But tonight felt different. The air in the woods around them was still, quiet, almost too quiet. It felt like the trees were holding their breath. The house loomed ahead, half collapsed with shattered windows and ivy creeping up the crumbling walls. It was everything Theo had imagined. Creepy, abandoned, perfect for a viral live stream. They stepped inside, the floor creaking underfoot, and Theo immediately began filming. This is it, guys. This is where it all went down. The Red Room, hidden from the world, until now. They walked through the house, the camera flicking over cracked furniture, broken mirrors, and peeling wallpaper. There was an oppressive weight to the place, an eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air, like something was watching them. Theo's pulse raced. His breath caught when he spotted a door at the end of the hall, half hidden behind a pile of debris. He moved toward it, pushing aside broken boards and rusted metal, the camera steady in his hands. When the door creaked open, the room inside was just as he had imagined it. It was small, barely enough space for a chair in the middle of the floor, but it was the equipment that caught his eye. A series of old cameras mounted in the corners of the room. A desk, cluttered with old monitors and wires, all leading into the walls. And what struck him the most was the red glow that illuminated the room from an unknown source. The camera buzzed to life. Theo's heart skipped a beat. The cameras, his camera, had powered on. He looked at Jen, who was just as startled as he was. "Did you do that?" he whispered. Jen shook her head, eyes wide. "No, it wasn't me." Theo walked closer to the desk, and as his fingers brushed over the controls, a notification popped up on his screen. The words were chilling. "You are live." He froze. His breath caught in his throat as the room seemed to pulse, the walls narrowing, the red glow intensifying. He could hear the faintest whisper, like static, but it felt wrong, like someone was breathing through the speaker. He glanced at the camera, his mind racing. Someone's watching. But from where? Jen, Theo said, his voice shaking. "I think." Before he could finish, a message popped up on the screen. "Welcome, Theo." His pulse raced. "Jen, this isn't real, right? This can't be real." Jen looked terrified. "Theo, I don't think we're alone here." Theo turned back to the screen. Messages were flooding in. Hundreds of them. Hundreds of viewers, but their names weren't human. They were strings of symbols, gibberish that made no sense. The comments, though, were clear. "Do it. Make it hurt. Kill her." Theo's hands shook as he stared at the screen. "What the hell is this?" His voice trembled. Jen stepped back, her face pale. "Theo, stop. You need to turn it off. This isn't safe. We need to leave." But before Theo could respond, the room around them seemed to shift. The walls felt closer, the air colder, thicker. The cameras buzzed, again, and the red glow intensified. Theo turned back to the screen, his hands frozen in place as the comments kept coming. "Do it. We're waiting." Suddenly, the screen flickered, and Theo's heart stopped. The viewers' messages were no longer just comments. They were commands, instructions. "We want to see you suffer. We want to see her suffer." A sharp pang of fear shot through Theo's chest. He turned to Jen, who was now visibly shaking. "Jen, this isn't real. It can't be. We need to leave." But Jen was no longer standing where she had been. She was at the far end of the room, staring blankly at the wall. Her face was expressionless, her eyes empty. Jen, what's wrong?" But Jen didn't answer. Instead, her mouth opened, and a whisper echoed from her throat, a voice that was not hers. "You're ours now," Theo screamed, backing away. The room seemed to close in on him, the walls pressing, the lights flashing. He scrambled to turn off the stream, but there was no off button. The camera kept running. The messages kept coming. "We want to see you bleed. We want to watch you die." And then, from the darkened corners of the room, figures began to form. Faces, pale, twisted faces, watched him, their eyes glowing with hunger. They were the viewers, the audience. But they weren't human. Not anymore. Theo tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He couldn't escape. The door slammed shut, the room warping around him as the red glow grew. He couldn't turn off the camera. He couldn't stop the stream. The whispers grew louder, their demands more violent. Theo could feel himself breaking, his mind splintering, his sanity slipping. He was trapped in the room, his own screams now part of the broadcast. His body, his soul, were no longer his own. The viewers watched, as they always had, feeding off his fear, his suffering. And Theo, the once bold vlogger chasing fame, became the new host, the Red Room's latest victim. The stream had no off switch. He would be live forever. Days, months, years passed. The stream continued, and Theo's face remained on the screen, his eyes wide with terror, his voice screaming in agony, but no one could hear it, not in the way that mattered. He was a ghost, now a prisoner of the Red Room, forever serving the audience that watched from another realm. Story number 10. Emily Lowe had always been drawn to the charm of old houses. The creaky floors, the antique woodwork, the hidden corners where time seemed to stop. When she bought the old estate on the edge of town, she was thrilled by the idea of restoring it. The house was big, maybe too big for just her and her dog, Max, but it had character, and it was all hers. For the first few weeks, everything went smoothly. Emily spent her days sanding floors, patching up walls, and sorting through boxes of forgotten junk left by the previous owners. But there was something unsettling about the place, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Max was the first to notice it. Every day, without fail, the dog would start barking furiously at a specific spot in the living room. The same spot. Emily would glance over, annoyed at first, but there was nothing there. No shadow, no movement, just empty space. Max would whine, his tail tucked, his eyes wide with unease. "Max, enough," Emily would say, trying to calm him, but the dog wouldn't stop. It was as if he could see something she couldn't. One evening, as Emily sat in the living room reading, the floor beneath her feet groaned. She glanced over at Max, who was now standing, his eyes fixed on that same spot, barking again, his body shaking with anxiety. The floor suddenly gave way beneath her, and with a loud crack, a section of the wooden floor collapsed. Emily gasped and scrambled back, heart pounding. The hole in the floor was large enough to crawl through, revealing a narrow, dark passageway leading downward. Max was quiet now, as if something had changed in the air. Emily knelt by the hole, her curiosity getting the better of her. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it down into the darkness. At the bottom, she could make out a set of bricked-off stairs leading into a hidden chamber below. "What the hell?" she muttered under her breath. The house was full of secrets, but this was something she hadn't expected. Without thinking too much, she grabbed a crowbar from her toolkit and pried up the remaining floorboards around the hole, making the opening larger. Then, with Max following closely behind, she carefully climbed down the stairs. The air in the hidden room was damp and stale. It smelled of earth and something older, something long forgotten. Emily's flashlight beam danced across the room, revealing something that made her stomach churn. In the center of the chamber, around a faded rug, sat skeletal remains. At least 6 of them, seated in a perfect circle. Each skeleton was holding an antique mirror. The mirrors were old-fashioned, round, ornate, their edges silvered with age. Emily's throat tightened as she stepped closer, her flashlight flicking across their pale, bony faces. She couldn't look away. The mirrors they were holding, the way they reflected the room back at her, the way the eyes of the skeletons seemed to follow her. Max whimpered at her feet, his fur standing on end. Emily's heart beat faster as she scanned the room. The remains didn't look like they had been disturbed in years, maybe decades. She couldn't understand why anyone would leave a room like this hidden under a house. Then her eyes landed on one of the mirrors. It was cracked, the glass spiderwebbed in a way that seemed almost deliberate. The reflection in the glass was wrong. She saw herself, her face, but it didn't match the way she felt. Something about the eyes in the reflection didn't look quite right. Her pulse quickened and she reached down to grab the mirror. It was heavier than she expected, cold against her hands. As she stood up to leave the room, her eyes met the reflection again. The glass shimmered for a moment and blinked. She froze. The reflection blinked. "Max, come on," she said, her voice shaking, and hurried back up the stairs. She climbed out of the hole, back into the living room, the mirror cradled in her arms. Max followed her, tail tucked low, still uneasy. The moment Emily set the mirror on the living room table, she felt the air in the house shift. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive. That night, as she sat in her armchair trying to focus on her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mirror, the way it seemed to look at her, was bothering her. Every time she glanced at it, she saw her reflection blink or tilt its head. But when she moved, the reflection stayed the same, locked in place. She tried to shake it off. It was just a mirror, just a trick of the light, she told herself. But then things started to change. At first, it was subtle. The reflection would move without her. She'd be sitting at her desk, writing, and the reflection in the mirror would smile, just a little too wide, or it would tilt its head as if studying her, and then, sometimes, it would blink. At night, she'd lie awake in bed, eyes wide, staring at the reflection of herself in the mirror across the room. She thought she saw her reflection move, just a little, just enough to make her doubt her own sanity. And then, one night as she lay there, she could have sworn her reflection was smiling at her. She rolled over, telling herself it was just her imagination. But when she turned back to face the mirror, the smile was gone, replaced by her own confused, frightened expression. The days passed, and it only got worse. Emily found herself avoiding the mirror, but when she did look, she saw her reflection begin to act on its own, independently of her. She would reach for a cup, and her reflection would stand perfectly still. She'd turn to look at it, and it would be smiling. Too wide. Too knowing. Max, her ever-loyal dog, was no comfort anymore. The once friendly animal now growled whenever. It saw her reflection in the mirror, its body stiff with fear. It was as if the mirror self wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was something else. One day, Emily woke up late, her head aching from another restless night. She dragged herself to the bathroom, looking into the mirror for the first time in hours. But when she met her reflection's eyes, she didn't recognize it. The woman staring back at her wasn't her anymore. It was someone else, someone perfect. Her reflection smiled widely, far too widely, and nodded. And in that moment, Emily understood. The mirror was no longer just showing her image. It had taken her. Her reflection was her now. Desperate, she grabbed the mirror, trying to rip it from the wall, but it was too late. The room had become alive with her reflection's presence, each moment stretching and twisting. She stumbled backward, and when she reached the door to the living room, she saw her, the reflection, standing in the hallway, smiling that wide, perfect smile. Emily opened her mouth to scream, but her voice came from the mirror. Her doppelganger stepped forward, and the mirror winked. Later, Mr. Dalton, the elderly neighbor, knocked on Emily's door. He hadn't seen her in days. He was about to knock again when he saw a figure in the window, a woman, waving. Smiling, he waved back, but when he turned to leave, he thought he saw the woman in the mirror, grinning.